Hi everybody, welcome to this week's installment of Business Computing Weekly. We're recorded on February the 5th, 2012. I've got I think a very special episode of Business Computing Weekly. It's not your typical show. We're going to be talking a lot about health today. Why? Because so many people in the IT industry suffer from being overweight and obesity. I wanted to share my story with you. How I've managed to lose 56 pounds and avoid diabetes, avoid being on blood pressure medication, and a whole lot more. So stick around. I think you're going to find this a life-changing episode. I really do. We'll be right back, so don't go away. Hi everybody, thanks for stopping by today and spending some of your Sunday afternoon with us. I appreciate everybody coming by the live chat room. Just a reminder, we are sponsored by GFI Software and frugalbrothers.com. So we appreciate you coming by. Today is two things. First, the unveiling of my new hairdo. And here it is, right here. I got a buzz cut. And I'm getting acclimated to that. Now you can see that I've got kind of a two-tone thing going on. Silver on the silver fenders is what we said. What did Gordon refer to us to as crinklies? Us old crinklies. There you go. I did it. I did it. Thank you, Corn Doggy Rob. I know somebody with the good taste and fashion sense that you have would appreciate fully what I've done here. That's me. And there you go. Now you can say you've seen it. And, it's very liberating after years and years of having kind of long hair for an older guy. Yeah, it's very low. In fact, I'm going to, I used the number 3, that you recommended, by the way. And I think, well, that might be a bit longer than what I want. So we're going to do it with the number 2. And I think that should be just about right. We'll find out. Okay. Tom Mack breaks out the Clippers. I want to share 3 different stories with you today. And the first story is really pretty painful, but I think it's important. And it goes back to my childhood. My family on my mother's side predominantly was overweight and obese. My grandmother, my mom, her sisters, brothers were all fat. Well, actually, they were obese. A few of them morbidly obese. And I grew up in a household where my mother would remind me on a pretty regular basis that diabetes runs in the family. And it seemed like an unavoidable path. And there was also a lot of heart disease on my mom's side of the family. And also cancers were pretty common in the family. And that was a heavy thing to accept as a child, that somehow when I got older that I was going to be sick like they were. It was a hard thing to go through. And as a child, I was fat. My dad had a sweet tooth, so there were always snack cakes and donuts in the house. And my mom had a thing for potato chips. In the UK, they're called crisps. And so there was always this stuff in the house growing up. But fortunately, around my 8th grade freshman year of high school, I shot up a couple inches over the summer break. And I was pretty lean. When I returned to school, people hardly recognized me. Now, I still grew up in a time where you rode your bike and you went out and you played, and I played football and basketball and all that. And fortunately, I was able to make it through high school being pretty lean, substantially lean, and ate whatever I liked. And that sort of stuck with me during my 20s. But I watched as my mom's family, my dad's family, I really didn't have the observation to see what was going on there, because Dad wasn't, his family remained in Pennsylvania, and we were living in Indiana, where my mom's family had moved to. So I didn't really have a lot of opportunity, except maybe once a year, to visit with Dad's side of the family. And their side of the family, there was also some obesity as well, but probably no more than the average, norm in the population. But nonetheless, in my 20s, I was still pretty much able to eat what I want when I wanted, and felt really good and energetic. By my early 30s, I had gotten married to Cindy, and ran a successful small business, and we enjoyed going out to eat, as a lot of young marrieds do, and I liked my desserts and all that, and I just kept getting larger and larger and fatter and fatter. But I was brought up, and this is what's important to understand, I was brought up to believe that someday that I would get sick from diabetes, and I would have a heart attack someday, and all that. It was always in the back of my mind, even though I was rationalizing, saying, just because you got a few extra pounds doesn't mean you're going to have a heart attack, etc. I kind of tried to rationalize that in my brain. One day I heard about, I thought, this has gotten out of hand. I've got to do something about it. So I, got looking at various diet books. And at that time, this would have been about 1996, the low-fat diet was what was being pushed big time. And I bought into it, going on a low-fat, calorie-restricted diet with an exercise routine. And I began to do that, and got very strict and overdid it on the exercise. I was doing 2 workouts a day every day, 7 days a week, totally ignoring all the rules of exercise, because I wanted the fastest results possible. I wanted to get lean as quickly as I could. And that was not a smart thing to do. It was not sustainable. And eventually I went back to my old eating habits, put the weight back on, and through my 40s continued to get fatter and fatter and fatter. And again, resigning myself to the fact that this is genetic. I'm predisposed to be fat. There's nothing I can really do about it. I probably don't eat any more stuff than next. I never felt like I ate more than other people. And wherever I turned, I always ran into the same thing. You eat too much and you don't exercise enough. Eat too much, you don't exercise enough. Well, last year, a year ago, and this is, I hate to do this, but I am going to show you what I look like. That's me a year ago. And that's just from basically the neck up. And you can see the double chin, maybe even a triple chin kind of going on there, huh? Right there. You look like the cat. Right? There might be something to that. I don't know. But I was fat, and I was feeling horrible. I was tired constantly. I felt sick. I had no energy, no pep, no desire to get up in the morning. I didn't have that desire. I wanted to sleep. At the end of work, I was exhausted. Didn't feel like going anywhere. Again, always having this stuff in my head from a child that I would one day ultimately get fat, have diabetes, maybe have a heart attack, have heart disease. And I went to the doctor, and they took my blood pressure, as they do, and took my weight. I was 239 pounds at 5 foot 10 3/4 inches, which puts me as medically obese and in danger of heart attack, stroke, diabetes, so forth. And we did blood work. My fasting blood sugar was about 140. My blood pressure, I think, was 164. I want to say over 98, something like that. It was astronomical. So much so that Dr. Nussbaum, Nicholas Nussbaum, prescribed Norvasc, which is a blood pressure medication, and said, I don't want you to exercise or anything until we get your blood pressure under control. The number's that high. You're not that far from being hospitalized. Not that far from being hospitalized. And my complexion was bad. I didn't have good color in my face. Dr. Nussbaum said I looked kind of gray. And I felt very, very sorry for myself and very ashamed of myself that I'd let myself get this bad. And I felt hopeless because I had tried the Atkins diet. I had tried the low-fat exercise diet, and I didn't find anything that worked for me. Nothing that I could live with, and nothing that would last for the long term. And it's one of those things where you sit back and you begin to think about your mortality, which is something I never really did. So within about a week of starting the high blood pressure medication, which made me feel even worse, I was watching Netflix and came across a documentary called Fathead, Fathead, Fathead. It was by Tom Norton. He is Thomas Norton. He is a edutainer, self-described edutainer. He's a computer programmer who began to question the validity of another documentary. What was the name of that? It was about a guy who ate at McDonald's every day for 30 days and got really put on like 20-some pounds and really raised hell with his system. Anyhow, that was, I forget, Super Size Me. Thank you, Corn Doggy Rob. That was exactly the name of it. And he began to point out all the bad stuff about this documentary and that the inconsistencies in the documentary. And then he went on to go into several politics. But the bottom line is that he really opened my thinking up and exposed me to another gentleman by the name of Gary Taubes. Now, Gary Taubes is a journalist. He is a scientist. And particularly in the area of physics is where he comes from. And Gary Taubes wrote a book years ago called Good Calories, Bad Calories, Why We Get Fat. And that prompted me to read Gary's book and become a follower of Gary Taubes. And that led to more study and so forth on my part. And it all began with the concept. There was a statement made by Hippocrates that said, let food be thy medicine. So in other words, if food got you into this mess, food can get you back out. Food got you into it, food will get you back out. And it began by changing my relationship with food. Now let me tell you, I'm probably none unlike a lot of other people out there. My family's get-togethers are food-centric. The holidays, birthdays, special occasions like anniversaries and so on all revolve around food. And not just any kind of food, but carbohydrate-dense foods. And the first job was I had to make a decision. I either continue to live to eat, which is what I have been doing, or I eat to live and give my body what it needs. Now, there is the second problem. It's problem number 2, which is what we're taught that we need to live. And what we're taught traditionally is we're given here, at least in the States, was called a food pyramid. A food pyramid. And that was, you had to have so much grains every day, so much dairy product a day, and so much meat and nuts a day in this pyramid of food. And meat was at the top of the pyramid. Then below that was your dairy products, and below that was grains. And roughly about 30% or to 40% of your daily caloric intake should be based on grains and fruits and essentially carbohydrate-dense foods. So about 30-40% of your caloric intake should be derived from carbohydrate. This is what we've been taught. When I talked to Dr. Nussbaum about losing weight, he just looked at me this is a man just began private practice. He just began private practice, and this is what he said. This is a man who just spent over $100,000+ in medical school. Calories in, calories out. You gotta burn more calories than you take in. Simple as that. This is a doctor. This is somebody who has completed medical school, internship, and residency. Passed his board certifications and is now in private practice. At that time, I wasn't confident enough to ask him, Doctor, what do you base that on? I wasn't confident enough in what I've learned to question him about that. Today, I would question him about it. Because the fact of the matter is, after listening to Gary Taubes, I began to learn about some simple laws in physics called thermodynamics. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about thermodynamics. There are 4 basic laws to thermodynamics, really only 2 of which apply to weight loss. And the first law of thermodynamics more or less states that you cannot create energy from nothing. Can't do that. But it's the second law of thermodynamics that flies in the face of what Dr. Nussbaum told me, which was calories in, calories out. The second law of thermodynamics states, in very simple terms, that it is impossible to derive the same amount of that energy in. It is impossible to derive the equal amount of energy out. And in the world of physics, that's referring to heat. It's impossible. It can't be done. So a calorie in does not transmute to exactly 1 calorie of energy output. It simply defies the laws of thermodynamics. In other words, a calorie is not a calorie. Because we are a body of chemical processes, and we have enzymes in the gut, in the digestive system, which breaks down food to glucose, and that consumes a certain amount of energy, and that energy, depending on the efficiency of the body, can either directly be attributed to burning it off through activity or being stored as fat. It's actually called energy partitioning, to be exact. And we are genetically programmed, all of us differently, on how we deal with energy partitioning. That is why there are people out there who are lean, can live on a carbohydrate-dense diet and still stay lean. But there are very few. Use this analogy. It's like cigarettes and lung cancer. Not every smoker will get lung cancer. In fact, it's about 1 out of 10 smokers will get lung cancer. But when you take lung cancer patients on the whole, about 80% of lung cancer patients can be attributed to smoking. Okay? And that's kind of how the laws of thermodynamics work. So it would stand to reason that if a person deprives their body of carbohydrate, especially simple forms of carbohydrate. And what do I mean by simple forms of carbohydrate? I'm talking specifically about refined sugars, enriched flours, certain grains, simple starches such as white rice, potatoes, etc. If you deprive the body of the simple carbohydrates, the body has to work much more carefully to create glucose out of, say, things like protein. It's a process called glucogenesis, which is conducted by the liver. That's a liver function. Glucogenesis is where the liver can and does take proteins and converts them to glucose to run the body. This in turn means that it takes more calories to produce the energy than the energy you get from it. Again, this is a second law of thermodynamics. And this is why we can observe that a person that's deprived of simple carbohydrates will in fact generate more heat than a person who does not, because of this process. Now, I also learned about what's called insulin resistance. Now, most of you have heard of the term insulin. Insulin is a hormone that regulates glucose in the bloodstream. That's its job, is what it does. And it works in conjunction with the liver. And glucose resistance tends to build up over time. Generally speaking, it builds up over time. And so as we age, as we continue to maintain a carbohydrate-dense diet, we'll typically become insulin resistant. And what that simply means is if you remember what I said earlier about energy partitioning, the way that if you become insulin resistant, the way your body will handle that energy, the glucose, is basically secrete more insulin, which in turn works with an enzyme called methylglycols to push that energy into your fat cells. I want you to think of your fat cells in your body like a battery. I want you to think of them like a battery, the fat cells in your body. The problem is, the more insulin in your body, the more insulin resistant you are, the less of a charge that battery can hold. So, it's like having a series of devices hooked up to a properly charged battery. When everything's working efficiently, all the devices will work, the lights will burn bright, etc. When the battery is not charged sufficiently, devices will refuse to operate, or the lights will dim, etc., until the battery is extinguished. Through insulin resistance, the battery is not being charged properly. It's being stuffed full of junk that it can't use as energy. So your cells, that operate the body, the human body, are basically starving for energy. It's possible to overeat, as we've been told, and starve at the same time. Your cells are being starved for energy by the fat cells in your body refusing to release the food to the cells. And so the cells are screaming, for crying out loud, eat something. That's how it works. We've been told that people get fat because they eat too much, when in fact science proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, there's empirical data to back up what I'm saying, that we actually eat too much because we're fat. It's different. It's just the opposite. You see, modern medicine basically tells us to do what? That we eat too much and that we don't exercise enough. This gives me the second story. And we're going to turn back the time machine, the years of the 1850s. That's the time. The 1850s in the American West. in the Arizona, what the area territory we know as Arizona today, lived, and to this day lives, a great Indian nation called the Pima Indians. The Pima Indians were, as far as we know, the best we can tell, the most prosperous Indian nation to have existed at that time. They were extremely healthy. Very, very healthy. They were wealthy. They had warehouses full of food. They hunted and fished. In the mountains. There was some agriculture. They grew corn, etc. They were very well fed, muscular, and this was notated by a surgeon accompanying the U.S. cavalry at the time. The federal government, so far as to went to ask the Pima Indians, as the gold rush happened, and they called them the 49ers when they started heading out west, if they would feed and help protect settlers and prospectors on their journey to California, and they did so. Fast forward in time of a couple decades, we took their land and put the Pima Indians on reservations. And they went from being the wealthiest Indian nation in the country to the poorest. When their health was observed as a poor country, as a poor nation, Indian nation, obesity was rampant. Now, this flies in the face of everything we're taught today by nutritional scientists, for example, who tells us that the obesity epidemic here in America and in Europe and other parts of the world is because of affluence. People can afford more food, so they eat much, and they can afford to be more sedentary. This flies just in the face of that. Whenever you find areas of great poverty, you'll typically find obesity. Why? How can that be? Well, it turns out that the diet that the government was providing to the Pima Indians chiefly consisted of bread and coffee. Bread and coffee, a high carbohydrate dense diet. In fact, starvation was rampant. There's other examples of that out there. So how does this all relate to me? So I'm 50, just turned, or getting ready to turn 52 years old, 239 pounds, high blood pressure, pre-diabetic, probably not that far along from either a heart attack or a stroke. How does that affect me? So I began to learn and talk to people and read and research. And I began a diet that was low carbohydrate, but yet a diet that I could live with. Just like in the documentary Fathead, the first thing I did is I said, one, I'm going to change the way I think about food. I'm going to quit living to eat, and I'm going to treat it, now I'm going to eat to live. That was the first decision. I got to change my relationship with food altogether. The second thing is I had to tell myself, look, I need to devise a plan that I can live with, okay, that allows me to enjoy the stuff I crave. And what do people crave naturally? Salt, fat, and sugar. That's what people naturally crave, and for good reason. From time primordial, these are the tastes that we were genetically programmed to want. Salt, fat, and sugar. Unfortunately, producing salt and fat, for example, from meats, has become a very expensive proposition, as you well know. But processed foods based on sugar and grains are very cheap to make. Therefore, it is actually the lack of affluence. And this is not a hypothesis. This is pretty sound and based on a lot of empirical evidence. It is, in fact, the lack of prosperity will be more conducive to diets high in carbohydrate than there is a high protein-based diet. Okay. So what I've done is I try to find a way to lose weight. And yes, I still believe, and let's talk about exercise in just a moment, the benefits of it. And by the way, I'm going to say this very carefully. There is no scientific evidence, not one study, not one, linking exercise with weight loss. Not one. Not one. There is absolutely no scientific proof that there is a link between the two. It is all based on the old calories in, calories out mantra that has been taught for decades and decades. There are plenty of good reasons to exercise. Plenty of good reasons to exercise. Overall fitness, improving your health, your stamina. Those are all very valid reasons. Some people exercise because they enjoy it. Here's the second thing we're told. We're told that people are too sedentary, and that's why they get fat. This is what we're told by doctors and nutritionists and the TV. Let us understand that the diet industry is just that. It's an industry, and they've got to sell those $100 running shoes. They want to sell the $900 treadmills. They want to sell the food programs at Weight Watchers. And it's all geared around one principle, the fact that we know that you will fail because none of these diets are sustainable. People fail on them all the time. They're not sustainable for any length of time. This is a fact. So, if exercise doesn't cause weight loss, how can that be? Remember again the second rule of thermodynamics, the second law of thermodynamics, which we can actually consume more energy than we produce, depending on how efficient we are at it. Now, you've got exceptions. Lance Armstrong is an exception. The way his body partitions energy is very much, Michael Phelps, the swimmer, could burn through 12,000 calories a day. Again, his body's... Look, basically, we've been taught, if we used medical analogy here, we've been taught that the whole diet and exercise will make you lose weight. It's the equivalent of saying the more basketball that I play, the taller I'll become. It's total nonsense. In other words, the less you weigh, the more energetic you become. That's because your body is processing and handling energy efficiently. As the insulin resistance decreases, the way your body copes with energy improves. And it makes you want to move. The less you weigh, the more you want to move. You want to get up. You want to move around. You want to do things like hiking, biking, whatever it is you like to do that you didn't feel like doing before because you were not in balance. You were not in a state of caloric balance. It wasn't happening. You were in a state of insulin resistance, and that's a totally different animal. Okay, back to my plan. So what did I do? I did some research, and I found that if this is based on what's considered to be a normal, healthy adult, your mileage will vary, and you have to kind of fine-tune it to your own body. No one's the same. But as a guideline, if you consume more than about 150 grams of carbohydrate in a day, that is at least slow or greater weight gain. It's about 150 grams or more a day is weight gain. That's about the equivalent of 8 ounces of soda. By the way, don't know if this is accurate. All I know report is what I read, which is the average American now consumes 44 gallons of soda pop every year. 44 gallons. That's not including the gallons of ice cream and other stuff. That we're talking 1 8-ounce glass of soda is about all the carbohydrate you should have in a day. If you're between 100 to 150 grams of carbohydrate per day, for most people, they will maintain their current weight. They will come into a state of caloric balance. Their metabolism will support that weight. and you will be in a form of equilibrium between 100 to 150 grams of carbohydrate. Between 50 to 100 grams of carbohydrate is slow, steady weight loss. Below 50 grams of carbohydrate a day is more rapid weight loss. Now, it's not necessarily you can't, the body, what happens, however, and this is interesting, that eventually you'll plateau. And the reason you plateau is because as you start a diet for weight loss purposes, your metabolism is supporting you at a weight of X. So if you're, like I was, 240 pounds, as I'm reducing carbohydrate, my body is still acting and metabolizing as if I weighed 240 pounds. There is a period between where you started and where the body ultimately will catch up. But as you drop to 200 pounds and then, or 220 pounds, 210 pounds, etc., the metabolism is starting to catch up with that. Exercise causes fat loss. That is incorrect. There is no science to support that. Please show me one study, scientifically sound study, that backs that comment up. What exercise does do is stimulates the increase in muscle density. The creation of muscle, particularly resistance exercises such as weightlifting. I think Tom Mack in the chat room does a lot of weightlifting. I've started doing a little bit of weightlifting. But no, through the loss of fat, no. What you're doing is using the metabolism to draw on your fat cells to fuel the body with glucose. Exercise burns energy. Not saying that it doesn't. What we're saying is that when you're talking about for the purposes of weight loss, Tom, for the purpose of weight loss, you don't need to exercise to lose weight. There is no correlation between the two. As a matter of fact, exercise stimulates the appetite, makes people hungry, and they gain weight. Do you realize how much exercise, if this really worked, what you're stating really worked, how long would you have to exercise and intensely exercise to burn off a Big Mac sandwich? Or even a candy bar? Therefore, it's not really relevant. Yeah, in your case, you're ripping muscles and regrowing them. You're doing it for a very precise set of reasons, but it is not based on weight loss. If I recall, you were a lean individual to begin with. Remember what I said earlier, depending on genetics and how well you partition energy, okay, most of us, and especially if you see fat and obese people, their bodies partition energy, that is the fuel they're taking in, a lot differently than the ones who don't, the ones that are lean. So my plan to lose weight consisted of staying between 50 and 100 grams of carbohydrate per day. And I have pretty much maintained that through, you convert fat to muscle. No, you don't convert fat to muscle. Fat is fuel, no more, no less, like gas in the car. That's like saying I can take a can of gas and somehow magically get to Ohio, drive to Ohio just with a can of gas in my can. Right, it's impossible. It's simply the fuel for the body. So my plan was to stay between 50 and 100 grams of carbohydrate per day and still occasionally enjoy. I had to think of this as a lifetime commitment. Do I splurge? Do I avoid carbohydrate altogether? No. Do I splurge occasionally and have a slice of pizza? Yes. But I go right back to watching my carbohydrates after that splurge, and nor do I do it in excess. And nor do I do it often. About once a week, I would have more of what you call a more traditional meal. Well, I'll have a little bit of carbohydrate. Maybe I'll have a dinner roll with dinner, or maybe I'll have little bit of sweet potato or part of a baked potato or something like that. That's my carbohydrate for the week. Many times I'm under 50 grams of carbohydrate. Last few days I've been under 50 grams of carbohydrate per day. And the food, this is the other thing. Tom mentioned in the chat room that to lose weight, you got to eat things you don't like. You know, things you like make you fat and things you don't like are good for you. That's not the case. Because here's the third story that I want to tell you. We've been sold a low-fat diet program. We've been hook, line, and sinker. The medical industry has been saying low fat, low fat, low fat. Let's talk about that. This is all begins, my story begins with a fella back in the 1940s by the name of Ancel Keys. Ancel Keys did a study called the 7-Country Study, and in it he formed what was called the lipid hypothesis. The lipid hypothesis. And what he did is he studied the effects of serum cholesterol and heart disease on in 7 different countries, looking at 7 different populations, and concluded that serum cholesterol, particularly found in saturated fats, caused heart disease. And he found and he really fell in love with that hypothesis. He really fell in love with that hypothesis, and it's quite well documented that Ancel threw out in his study any empirical evidence that would suggest otherwise to the hypothesis that he so much loved. In other words, anybody who knows a lick about science knows that there's a problem right off the bat, that if you believe something and then you conduct a study to back it up, you're going to have flawed science. Why is that? Because what is science? Science is observing something and then testing a hypothesis to see if that makes the observation true. It was just the opposite in the lipid hypothesis. Now, in the 1960s, George McGovern commissioned a Senate panel for talking about the health of America and so forth, and became infatuated with the low-fat diet, which was supported by the bad empirical evidence supported by and published by Ancel Keys in his 7-country study. And when scientists would come to Mr. McGovern and his commission and say, really, there's no good science backing up the correlation between cholesterol, saturated fat, and heart disease, they were more or less threatened to have their funding for their research cut off if they didn't toe the line. And so what happened is that essentially, thus, the low-fat diet was born. And not only that, the invention of trans fats. And trans fats are, of course, this witch's brew. I mean, come on. Really, there's oil in corn and in cottonseed that we can consume. The only way you extract oil from corn, cottonseed, and soybean is through a very complex set of chemical processes to extract it. That ought to tell us right there, it's man-made. It can't possibly be good for you. But that's beside the point, trans fats. And there's several kinds of fats, as you know. There's your good fats, which are your monosaturated fats, your polyunsaturated fats, and your bad fats, which are listed as saturated fats and trans fats. Now, I'm not going to argue about trans fats, but I'm going to talk about saturated fats. We'll talk about those just real briefly. The thing about saturated fat, if I take a nice piece of steak with a lot of fat on it, first I want to assure you that most of the fat is monosaturated fat. It is good fat. Most of that fat on the steak is good fat, not bad fat, okay? That's kind of a misnomer. The fat that's bad for you, particularly the saturated fat, there is no scientific proof, there are links, that says that saturated fat is the root cause of serum cholesterol that causes heart disease. In fact, there's a lot of empirical data to suggest quite the opposite. That it is heart disease that increases cholesterol as a protectionary mechanism against heart disease. In other words, that the true culprit of heart disease may very well be inflammation caused by a carbohydrate-dense diet. And when you look at the lipid hypothesis very carefully, you will see that his subject countries also happen to have carbohydrate-dense diets, but he did not make, or was unwilling to make, the connection. In fact, he even went so far as to say that in his study in the States, part of the correlation was because of our obsession with donuts. And yet, this is the science that we're being told is true and accurate science when it is indeed not. Therefore, I put forward to you today that a diet high in saturated fat, animal proteins, some dairy if you wish, cheese, butter, cream, etc., is a perfectly healthy, acceptable diet. I'm willing to put my reputation on it by posting after a year, this is after 1 year, this isn't after a few weeks, this is after 1 year, I'll give you an example of a typical day for me. In the morning, I'll have about 2 cups of coffee with powdered creamer, a teaspoon of powdered creamer. Breakfast, 2 eggs, 4 strips of bacon, and coffee. That is breakfast. For a snack, a fistful of walnuts. For lunch, 2 cheeseburger patties with lettuce, onion, tomato, and mayonnaise, and unsweetened iced tea. That is my lunch. Very satisfying lunch, by the way. A snack in the afternoon might consist of a few slices of pepperoni and a piece of mozzarella string cheese. And for supper, a piece of steak, normally about 4 to 6 ounces of steak, with a tossed salad with a vinaigrette or a ranch dressing, and maybe some broccoli, kale, cauliflower, something like that. And finally, for a snack, again, maybe some more walnuts and a few slices of pepperoni. That is my diet, which I've been doing for about a year. Hey, Coheed, how are you? Thanks for stopping by the chat room. And that is a typical day for me. Now, I have found that I tolerate Splenda sugar substitute very well, so I use it to sweeten my tea. It's 0 calories, 0 carbohydrate. I tolerate that very, very well. I do not tolerate aspartame well. That's a whole different subject. There are low carbohydrate treats out there. I have a sweet tooth. I've always had one. I have a recipe for a low carb cheesecake without a crust and using Splenda as a sweetener. So I have that from time to time. But that's typically my diet. It consists of a lot of meat, eggs, nuts, and cheese, yogurt, etc. Good for Coheed. Been trying to lose a little bit of weight himself. And with this diet, I can effectively stay easily around 50 to 75 grams of carbohydrate. Now, thanks to Fathead, there's days where I want to be closer maybe to 100 grams of carbohydrate because I feel I'm redlining around 100. So guess what? I can go to McDonald's and get a double quarter-pounder cheeseburger and an unsweetened iced tea. I have 40 grams of carbohydrate, and that's with the bun. But sometimes I'll order them and eat with half the bun. Half the bun. But look what I'm not eating. I'm not eating the French fries. I'm not drinking the sugary beverages. I'm not eating the apple pies or any of that stuff. And that's my diet, and has been so for the last year. And as a result, I'd like to share some things with you. Let's start with blood sugar. At the beginning of the show, my blood sugar a year ago, this was a fasting blood sugar. And if you know what that means that you can't have anything from about 8 o'clock in the evening the night before, including coffee, nothing, other than a sip of water, until it was 9 o'clock in the morning the next day. I had nothing to eat, nothing to drink. My fasting blood sugar was 140. Today, within 2 hours of eating, my blood sugar is 89 and stable. It's like a rock. It doesn't move. It stays 89. What does that mean to me in the way I feel? I don't get the sugar highs, the sugar crashes. I don't get jittery. I don't get nervous. I don't get hungry. It's real easy for me to go and go and go and not eat. In fact, that's one of the things about being on a low carbohydrate lifestyle is you got to remember to keep eating. In fact, you probably may find you're eating more than you ever did before, but now you're eating differently. You're eating a little bit differently. You're eating more efficiently. Okay? So that's what it did for me on the blood sugar level. Now my blood sugar is nice and flat. I don't get rip-roaring hungry and starving to death 1 minute and constantly desire to eat. That has went away. Number 2, my blood pressure. A year ago, I think it was like 164 over 90 something. It was really high, sky high. My blood pressure is now 112 over 84. 112 over 84. That's my blood pressure. Consistent. Actually, as you all know, I still am a smoker, and that's something, my next big thing to get around is the smoking. That's after smoking a cigarette within 20 minutes of walking in the doctor's office. I've seen it go as low as 104. Now that's too low. There you go. Now, what about being tired all the time? I'm going to show you this picture again. What's wrong with this picture? Take a look at my neck, and you will see that my neck had a lot of fat around the neck area. What does that mean? What that causes is a condition called sleep apnea. I snored. I didn't get enough oxygen when I was trying to sleep. Therefore, I never could get a restful night's sleep. Ergo, I was tired all the time. Sleep apnea was induced by, a matter of fact, a good warning sign if you're going to be prone to sleep apnea is if the measurement of your neck is over 17 inches. Okay? If your neck measurement is over 17 inches in diameter, then you're a good prospect for sleep apnea. So my sleep apnea is gone. Here's another great byproduct. Taking off my hat here. It turns out that insulin resistance, when people become pre-diabetic, one of the warning signs is the growth of dark patches of tissue on your arms, on your head particularly. And I had them. They were thick, not painful, but gross. They've all disappeared. They're gone. And of course, my color and complexion is so much better. By smoking. Let's talk about that for a minute. You don't smoke for 30 years and not have some damage. Just not going to happen. However, because I'm more energetic and I feel more energetic and want to do things, one of the things I do is I have a treadmill and I walk on it 4 times a week, sometimes 3, sometimes 5, depending. At least a half an hour, about 3 miles an hour. But I want the energy to want to do that, and that has improved my respiratory lung function significantly. It's made an improvement in the way I breathe. And I also find myself wanting to smoke less and less. The healthier I get, the less and less that I want to smoke. And that's what I did. And I guarantee you, I had to ignore what the doctors told me, what Weight Watchers told me, what every frickin' diet magazine and diet pill company and exercise equipment company told me to do in order to successfully lose weight and keep it off. I still have a long ways to go on my health because I'm my own worst enemy, and I've done things to myself that has not been good, and I'll pay the price for that. But I'm doing what I can do now to turn things around. And I hope by sharing my story with you today that you'll look at some of the things claimed as scientific fact by medical experts and realize it's been a big fat lie. We've been sold a bill of goods. That's it. That's the end of my stories. Thank you for taking time out of your day to listen to me, and I hope you find something that I've said today of value. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend. What's left of it. We'll have another more conventional Business Computing Weekly next Sunday, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.